Hi, everybody, and welcome to FSMA Fridays, the March edition for 2019. Thanks, everybody, for attending today and taking a little bit of time out of your agenda for hopefully a fun and rousing conversation around FSMA. And we even have a real exciting little side conversation, I think, today to bring to our FSMA Fridays. So for any of you that are new, I know I see a bunch of existing people who tend to show up for these FSMA Fridays, but for any of you that are new, the general sequence of FSMA Fridays it's really here to give a good industry update, talk a little bit about the industry, what's going on. A lot of that has a slight towards FSMA. Today we are going to talk a little bit more about some industry trends as well, and we'll go through that here in a moment. As you go through, and today, just to let you know who this is being sponsored by, first it's being sponsored by the Acheson Group. For any of you who don't know the Acheson Group, they're a global food safety consulting organization, right, with decades of expertise throughout the food supply chain. So very proud to be a part of this FSMA Friday with the Acheson Group. The other sponsor is SafetyChain. That's who I'm here with. SafetyChain is a quality management software system, and we've been deployed globally as well, and the system helps with both productivity and profitability as well as compliance that we're all here to talk about today. So a little bit about your sponsors. Thank you so much for joining. I know you're not here just to hear me go through this, so here's the agenda. Here's what we're going to talk about today, and this is what I'm a little bit excited about because it's not just all FSMA today. We do have a great FSMA update that we're going to go through and talk about, but we also have another item or topic to cover today around planning and actually going through an effective internal audit and some of the internal audit basics, and specifically how they apply to some of the GFSI standards as well. But just some general housekeeping notes. This is being hosted on GoToWebinar. You should see a panel on your right side where you can open up and submit questions. So if you have questions throughout the webinar today, please feel free to put those in the questions area in the box. And we also are recording this. So if you happen to be in and out, I know everyone's busy, you'll definitely get a recording here as a follow-up. So that way you can relive the magic that we're putting on here today. So with that being said, I'm not the only voice you're going to hear, and for many of you, probably you're happy about that, but I'm Dave Detweiler. I am a vice president here at SafetyChain and oversee a lot of different areas, a lot of it around our customers as well as some of our partner programs. And one of those partners that we have here at SafetyChain is the Acheson Group, and I'm joined today by two esteemed colleagues, Rolando Gonzalez, and he's going to be the gentleman that walks us through the FSMA update today. I also have with me a second person, so we're actually adding to the FSMA Friday crew here today. A lot of times it's just two of us, but today Rich Simmons is going to join us, and he's going to be the one talking us through some of those audits. And Rich is an expert in GFSI, again, with tons of experience and years of expertise to kind of help us walk through some of those intricacies. So excited here today. Hopefully everybody hasn't tuned out yet. We're going to drill right down into the meat of this. And with that, I'm going to get this started and kick it over to Rolando. Rolando, happy Friday. Thanks for joining us again here today. And it sounds like we might have a couple good updates here, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, Dave. Thank you so much, and happy to be back here with the FSMA Fridays audience. March was actually a very active month in regards to developments from the FDA in the context of FSMA, particularly in two different areas, food defense and the product safety rule. So the first one of those updates was actually at the beginning of the month. The FDA released the second draft guidance document on food defense, or the intentional adulteration rule. And the industry obviously has been waiting anxiously for these documents because they provide guidance, obviously, in terms of the expectations of the agency and clarification on many of the requirements that were included in the final rule as it was published. So this second one adds to, obviously, what was published in that first document that came out now a little while ago. But this one talks about how to conduct vulnerability assessments, and it goes through a couple different ways of doing that. The key activity types method, as well as pretty much the traditional, more comprehensive way of doing an assessment, and they address it as the three fundamental elements, which are, of course, protecting public health from determining, okay, what is the potential public health impact? What is the degree of physical access to the product? And what's the ability of an attacker to successfully contaminate the product? They also address how to do that in combination, so sort of a hybrid between the key activity types mode and the three fundamental elements approach. In addition to that, they talk about how to identify and implement the mitigation strategy. They talk about food defense monitoring requirements, and also they expand on the education, training, and experience that is required to be able to successfully manage an intentional adulteration prevention program. So very useful document. They actually, even towards the end, they also include some worksheets, food defense plan worksheets in the appendix. And that also, they add some examples about vulnerability assessment using that three fundamental elements approach that I mentioned, as well as a hybrid approach. So we found it pretty useful, and we've gotten that feedback as well from the clients that we work with. And we definitely await the third installment of these series of draft guidances that the FDA has provided. Along with that, the agency, about middle of the month, actually March 15th, they announced a public meeting that will happen at the CISCEN offices in College Park, and that will be on April 17th. So during that meeting, they will provide, they will discuss this draft guidance that I just talked about, and we'll also answer questions, of course, from the audience. I think those questions you have to submit in advance, though. So more details about that are in the FDA website. If you type food defense or intentional adulteration FDA, you should come up with it pretty quickly. Couple of things there. You can attend in person, or you can attend via webcast. TAG will be there, and we'll definitely bring you updates in terms of what was discussed during that meeting. So that was about food defense. In terms of the produce safety rule, again, as I said, the agency was active in terms of announcements as well. And first thing they published, middle of the month, they published the final dates for compliance with the agricultural water provisions of the produce safety rule. Pretty much what happened here is originally, because of the challenge associated and the challenges associated with water safety management, the provisions of the produce safety rule, you were to comply with most of them except for those agricultural water requirements, which you had some extended time to comply with, or companies had. And in this final publication, the agency has pretty much extended by 2 years the different compliance dates as compared to what was published in the original rule when it became into effect. So pretty much larger farms now have until January 26th of 2022. Small farms until January 26th of 2023, and very small farms a year after that, 2024, to comply with those requirements. That doesn't include, though, it doesn't change the compliance dates for Sprouts operations, so that's still the same as before. And then during that time, that extra time, the agency plans to work with different stakeholders to address the practicality of these requirements for water safety across different, farms, different water sources, and different uses. So that kind of that's part of the complexity part of it. It has prompted these additional time to comply with it.
Rolando, that's definitely a complex component. Is there any initial gut reaction based on what you've seen here, Rolando? It's complex, right? How the water, we've seen it right over the past year with some of the recalls and so forth. That's the daunting task, Rolando, kind of, is that complexity, right? It's our aquaculture. It's all over the place. How do we control that?
It is, absolutely, Dave. Yeah, it is a complex part of it. And the agency has been sensitive to that and has listened definitely to the different stakeholders. And we in the field, we've experienced quite a bit of anxiety, of course, from that sector of the industry in terms of how to comply with these different requirements, and we don't have time in terms of going through, what those are, but they can be tricky to comply with, certainly. So we see this as positive as well, for sure.
Yeah, it's been fun to watch everybody kind of coming together about it. We've watched the growers and everybody start to work together. It's been it's definitely complex, but something we want to solve, right? It's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And as there's efforts at the federal level, there is also that I'm aware of efforts at the state level to help different operations, of course, align with these requirements. And there's a lot of education required as well. And I know that that's also happening. Because some of these might be new, and again might be challenging for some of these farms to comply with. So anyway, we see that as a positive move as well. And actually later on, pretty much this week, the agency released another announcement on regarding the product safety rule, and this was the enforcement discretion policy that they had talked about before, and we actually covered that in a previous FSMA Fridays a number of months ago. But pretty much the agency intended to not enforce certain provisions of 4 of the different rules under FSMA, one of those being the product safety rule. And in this case, they decided that for a number of commodities here, which are wine grapes, hops, pulse crops, and almonds, that they were enforcing or bringing out that enforcement discretion right that they have for any entities growing, harvesting, packing, or holding these commodities that I just mentioned. So in other words, these operations dealing with any of these commodities will not have to abide to the requirements of the product safety rule yet, until the agency comes up with new rules or, clarity around the rules that would apply to these. Again, working with stakeholders and making sure that they understand, how to practically and how to realistically require these different elements of the product safety rule based on the unique circumstances that apply to these different commodities. So that's in terms of the product safety rule, what we have. There was one actual additional requirement based or related to the third-party accreditation rule, which is one of the 7 rules under FSMA. And the agency announced that they have accredited a couple more certification bodies, and this is pretty much has been here. So SGS, North America, and NSF certification. So those will be additional certification bodies that have been accredited by the FDA under these third-party certification program. And let's recall that this pretty much what this does is these third-party certification programs can be used by importers to establish their eligibility to participate, for example, in that voluntary qualified importer program, which is a program that importers can choose for expedited review and entry of different commodities or different products into the United States. So it's as I said, it's voluntary, it's fee-based, you have to pay for that, but it's a way to proactively facilitate the entry of those products into the U.S. Under certain circumstances, the FDA can actually require that some products are certified by these certification bodies. So that's let's keep that in mind. A general, and we always like to provide a little bit of what we've seen in the field. And one of the things that we've heard consistently from our clients is that the FDA, and this is now just in general, not just any of the rules in particular, but the FDA is spending quite a bit of time on the floor when they visit facilities for routine GMP inspections. They're spending quite a bit of time looking at that exactly, at execution and behavior of employees in the context of adhering to GMPs. And we're talking about they could spend like 45 minutes just watching an activity, just standing there, not looking through documents or anything, just observing. So and usually our clients find useful to hear about those things because it's just a matter of time before the FDA visits their facility, of course. And the last thing that I have here, Dave, because I definitely want to hear also from Rick about GFSI, a little bit of update on the Safe Food Canadian regulations. It's pretty much the requirements for licensing and to have a preventive control plan in place are now mandatory for a large sector of the industry. And there is pretty much a phase-in approach to this for another year and a half. So on January 15th, meat, fish, dairy, eggs, and maple operations started to become required to have a PCP, a preventive control plan in place. That's pretty much HACCP plus some additional regulatory requirements, including weights, labeling, grades, etc. Fresh fruits and vegetables, the compliant date will happen in January of 2020. And then cereals, confections, baked goods, processed products, and others will have until 2021. And obviously, I mean, there is additional information about this on the CFIA website. But we at TAG, of course, can also help with that. And we've been consistently doing that with many of our Canadian clients. As far as we know, implementation of that licensing requirement is going well. And the My CFIA portal, it's definitely accepting the online applications and issuing approvals. So hopefully this, for some of you within the audience, is also a good piece of information for those of you who export to or have any operations in Canada. So that's what I have so far, Dave. I know it's quite a bit of updates, but hopefully this will be useful to some of our attendees here.
Yeah, Rolando, that's wildly helpful. It's a great update. I know that the CFIA and the Canadian movement around Safe Food Canada has been big news. We've seen that here as well. A bunch of our customers talking about it. So that's exciting. And I appreciate the update. I think it was also really cool what you said. So did you say there were some worksheets in the second release of the intentional alteration? Did you say that there were some worksheets at the end of that addendum too? That sounds kind of clever.
There are, yes. There is some food defense plan worksheets Dave, towards the end of that document in the Appendix 1 section of it. So I think that industry will also find those useful. We typically get asked about examples of how should that look like. And the agency has provided a lot of flexibility, but obviously receiving some guidance like this is always important and useful.
Yeah, it's helpful, right? When you're trying to, you look at it, sometimes it can be daunting. Sometimes the examples can help break it down a little bit. So that's awesome. I appreciate the update, Rolando, as always, and happy FSMA Friday. So let's move over a little bit, and let's bring our illustrious second person from out of the dark here. And Rich, maybe you can start talking us through, first of all, thanks for being here today, but maybe you can start talking us through an effective internal audit and some of the things that you can bring light here to the conversation today. We're excited to have you.
Thank you very much, Dave, and I'm excited to be here. This is a timely subject with the industry move to GFSI as a mandate from retail and from food service corporations. One of the things about internal audit that's changed in the last 10, 15 years is an evolution from GMP type checklist to a more comprehensive verification documentation. And so my talk is going to be about how the internal audit has built a lot of different components in and how it feeds directly into the standards, the GFSI standards. I'm going to discuss very briefly our planning of an audit, conducting of an audit, what to do with findings, documenting findings, the value of open and closing meetings, and follow up on corrective actions.
That's always the one that gets us, Rich. That last one, right? There's follow up all over the place. We got to make sure we keep that in place.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about planning the audit. How about that?
Okay, sure. So planning the audit is really, really important. We're talking about making sure you know what to look for in an internal audit, the what, when, where, and how. Where is important because these audits are big. The standards are big. You cannot get through all of it in a very short period of time. So it's best to plan it over different months, if you will. You're basically looking at an audit of your entire food safety management system. and it's long, it's complex, and you have to interview people and you have to make appointments and so on. So it's really important to have a good planning program in place. You need to arrange who to see, who to interview, and what to do when you have an interview that doesn't go as well as you'd like it to. The audit schedule is another important component because unlike a third-party auditor coming into your facility where they have 2 days, they put their running shoes on, they fly through your plant, they fly through your documentation. It's always best if you have an internal audit to plan it so that you can strategically spend the required time and make sure that you have everything right. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so this is like a fluid environment, Rich, as you go through it, because the audit really tends, as you talked about, with follow-up and everything else, it really kind of sets the cadence throughout the facility, right? That audit triggers off a lot of other activities, so it's understood that the planning is wildly important. But tell us a little bit about the GFSI audit requirement here. I think we have some information about that.
Yep, sure. I've put down the requirement here. So all GFSI standards have to have benchmarked against this piece. And their comment is the standard shall require the organization to have an internal audit system in place to cover all activities within the scope of the food safety management system. Now, the next 4 or 5 slides are basically taken right out of the standards themselves. They're there for reference purposes. I cannot get through these by reading, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of a common theme through each of the standards. First of all, it's mandatory. There's no choice. You have to do it to comply to the GFSI standard, whichever one it is. There needs to be a procedure that outlines the methods of internal audit. You have to cover all requirements of the standard. So whether it's SQF, whether it's BRC, IFS, or FSSC, you have to go through each part, each component. Okay, and the management and communication is a very important piece as well. So this is not to be done in isolation of the management team. The management team need to be involved. They'll be involved in an opening and closing meeting, which I'm going to go into in a few minutes. But the communication level of what's being found, good or bad, is really important. For the BRC, a couple of different wrinkles. They mandate that an internal audit needs to be done over the course of a year. So one big audit is not, you would not be in compliance. So it's really important that that piece be part of it. And they require at least 4 internal audit sessions in a plant. Okay, again, it covers the standard, and all of the internal audit requirements from GFSI are that the auditor be independent, the auditor be competent, and competent means partly they have to be trained in internal auditing, but they also have to know the subject matter in which they're going to be auditing. So, for example, if an internal auditor is a SQF practitioner and they're going to do an audit of the supplier management or supplier approval program, they need to understand that program thoroughly to be able to do that audit and be successful in making sure that they're at a level of compliance. Okay, it's really important during internal auditing, and this is through all the standards, that you document what you've done, what you've seen, who you spoke with, what were the conclusions, and whether it's a compliant or non-compliant is really important. Obviously, if it's non-compliant, then a corrective action needs to be raised, and that corrective action should be very clear. It should include objective evidence. In other words, if you found something on line 2 at the hopper underneath, then you need to have that level of detail so that the reader can know exactly where it is and what the issue is. Okay, next slide. Okay, just some techniques. This is a really important part of this discussion. So for each clause or subclause of the GFSI standard, you want to ask yourself in the planning mode, what do I need to measure? What is necessary to hear or what do I need to see with my eyes? What do I need to smell with my nose? What documents do I need to see? What records do I need to see? And having that all in place prior to going out and doing it. The strategy for compliance, you want to interview. And the nice thing about an internal audit is it's not going to change your certificate. So if you have an interview with a receiver, asking that receiver about the approved supplier list and they don't know what you're talking about, you will raise a non-conformance. You have a chance to repair that and fix it so that they do, and you can coach that person, not necessarily the auditor, but the facility can coach that person so they can get into compliance. Okay, record review, you need to look at a history of documented performance. So it's not just the day of doing the internal audit. You want to look at what the performance has been over time. Visual observation is the time that you're doing it. Are they doing things correctly? Follow audit trails. An example of an audit trail will be you're looking through records and you find a couple of entries that were blank. Well, I think the world could be excused if there's one blank entry in 365 days, but you want an audit trail to make sure that it's not a habit and that this is just a one-time problem and that is a very minor situation you're seeing. You want to make sure that you look at all production shifts. One of the common things is the internal auditor works days and they may do all of their work in the day shift, but the night shift sometimes don't get the same level of training and exposure to programs because they're left alone. It's after hours, so to speak. So making sure you're working throughout all the shifts. That includes any back shifts for sanitation as well. So make sure you're getting out there to see that. Observe demonstrations of critical tasks. So CCPs, you want to observe the CCP operator doing his check. After the check's been done, then you want to make sure you ask the questions, challenge the knowledge of this person to make sure that they fit what you have indicated in the program. Okay, another trick is to find a perch, because GMPs are still a big part of internal auditing. So you want to find a perch and you want to be able to observe the plant without being seen, just so you can get a good sense of compliance. When you're walking around doing your inspections, use a process map, a process flow diagram to make sure that things are as they said it was and that the operation order is accurate. All right, and you're trying to find gaps, imperfections, and anomalies before a GFSI auditor comes in and does that. Okay, next slide, please.
These are some helpful hints too, Rich, and I think a lot of that comes to documentation and, like you said, a little bit of clever, right? Observation, right? So you're definitely documenting a whole bunch of stuff, but that observation comes into play. So what about verification?
Well, the internal audit is a tremendous verification tool. Okay, it allows you to go through every program and make sure that you are doing what you say you're doing. And you can challenge it, you can poke it. It gives you clause by clause requirements. And so it's an excellent verification tool. There are other verifications needed, and sometimes those could get built right into the internal audit. So that's something to look at, how you can build some other, for example, verification of your prerequisite programs. That can be part of the internal audit, but you need to make sure that your documentation will point to the internal audit as that receiver of that information. Okay, so the really important part of verification is to confirm that you do as you say you do. All right. The next slide, I have an example. Oh, no, I don't. I have another slide.
I was going to say, Rich, I think you were eating into this. If I back up for a second, so you got to say what you do as you say, and then document everything, right? You're documenting all the findings. You say that a lot here.
Yeah. Okay. So here we're talking about audit findings. So you usually will find things when, I mean, no plant's perfect. And so what you're trying to do is trying to create an atmosphere where you can correct as quickly as possible and to get corrective actions done and documented. So you need to document, I mentioned about clearly stating non-conformances and then bringing them up and reviewing them with management during your closing meeting.
Okay. And then,
next
like
slide,
you said, you got a little example here for us?
I have a little example. So on this example is just one section of the BRC. It's actually the first clause. So on the left, you have the clause number, the requirements specified, and then yes or no means are they compliant or not. So in this particular case, we got yes, but the auditor to look for is our planning notes. So the auditor is going to look for policies. Is the policy signed? Where is it posted? Is it dated? And everything that they want to look for this particular clause. So under the finding, there's just comments after the audit's been done, what they've done, what they found. Is it compliant? They said yes, so you need to have a compliant statement, and who was interviewed, and then date it. And then you're done for that particular clause. I know that sounds simple, but it's there's a lot of work. Most of these standards have somewhere between 250 and 300 clauses, so it's a lot of work.
If we could only see the heads nodding right here on the phone, Rich, I think everybody saw it. It is a lot of work. Everybody concurs with that for sure.
Yeah, this slide, this is actually my last slide for Q&A. I didn't know where to put it, whether I should put it first or last. I decided to put it last. So the importance of the meetings. So the opening meeting is really important to set the expectation, to introduce the auditors if you have more than one auditor, and how the audit process is going to work. You're going to also share the schedule. If it's over 4 months or 6 months or 9 months, then you're going to share that schedule with the management team. You're going to discuss the tools that you're using and the expectations when corrective actions are necessary. So that all leads up to the process of doing the internal audit. You do the internal audit, you have your findings, and you have your closing meeting where you thank everybody for participating and for being such good people. You want to mention always mention the positive things, because people don't want to hear negative all the time. They want to say we know we're doing good things. So make sure you spend the requisite time discussing that part, and then review the non-conformances in detail and follow up with them and make sure that they're being corrected properly. That, in a nutshell, is internal audit. Dave, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, Rich, I think that's wildly helpful. And I think you hit on a couple questions that had come in that I saw coming across. I did have one sent directly to me, Rich. Is there, we have a couple folks I see on here on the webinar, definitely with multiple facilities. Is there any tips or tricks, of overseeing kind of a multi-facility type audit? Is it consistency, Rich? Is it consistency in the audit? Because some of these people are using some of that information then to work with their continual improvement or even compare, right? Is there any kind of tips or tricks if you're overseeing multiple facilities, Rich?
Just that each facility is its own entity, and you have to treat it that way. There's a lot of common themes that would go through multiple facilities, and if the audit's being conducted by corporate personnel, that's great. Corporate personnel usually they know what's going on in every plant, so that's fantastic. It also gives them somebody from afar that gives them another perspective. But other than that, you're looking at the programs of the facility that you're actually auditing. So it's really important to make sure that there is that these aren't cookie cutter facilities, that they all have their own personalities and with their programs, and that you understand that component of it.
That's perfect. And then I did have just one more, and I know we're up against the time here, so I won't belabor this, but I did have one more that came to me. I thought it was kind of clever, Rich. Have you seen, so we have some companies on here with numerous auditors, right? Is it important, like how do you compare that one tough auditor, Rich, to the one, Dave's the easy grader and Rich, you're the tough grader? Is there a way to kind of get some of that consistency together?
Well, I think that certification bodies, if you're talking about certification, I think that's where this question's coming from. Certification bodies struggle with this. I mean, the hardest thing to calibrate is a human being. I mean, that's it. Each auditor comes from a completely different environment, different education, different level of experience, and some of them are pretty closed-minded when they come in and want to go through your facilities. You have to expect that you're going to get a tough auditor, and if you get an easier one, that's good for you, but it's not necessarily good for your programs. My thing all along has been that if you do a tough internal audit, then your third-party audit is going to be a lot easier, whether it's a tough audit or not.
For sure. Be toughest on yourself, right, Rich? And that's probably great words of wisdom for entire life, not just our food facilities. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right.
So I appreciate it, Rich. I think that's some great information. There might have been a couple questions we didn't get to. We'll take those offline, Rich, and make sure we follow up with the individuals.
Okay.
Just to wrap this up for everybody, please do, everybody's on social media now today, on LinkedIn, definitely connect with us. We're constantly putting updates out there, not just these monthly updates as well. So a great way to stay in touch. And then just to reiterate my appreciation specifically to TAG, specifically to Rolando and Rich today for your time. But if you ever need help, they are a vast resource of wonderful knowledge. I don't know that I've ever stumped them, and they always have great answers and a great way to handle it too. So years of experience, a great way to contact them. You'll see here on this slide. For myself and SafetyChain, we thank everybody for your time. Understand that a lot of this conversation was around documentation and audits and compliance. We have a wonderful quality management system here at SafetyChain that can help you both digitize and regurgitate some of that data back so you can use it as part of that continuous improvement. So with us, I just want to say thanks again for everybody's time, and we'll wrap it up here today. Rolando and Rich, thank you for your time. You will see the recording session coming out, and please do make a little bit of time and join us next month. April 26th will be our FSMA Friday. So thanks to everybody's time, and thanks Rolando and Rich, and have a great Friday. Take care.